Good evening, everyone. I'm Barbara Bell. I'm Artistic Director of Kingston WritersFest, and I'm delighted to welcome you to Thomas King in Conversation with Ben Charland. This is the fourth in our bi-weekly series of pre-festival events, and I'm really glad that you could join us. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which the festival customarily takes place and where I stand tonight is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. We gratefully acknowledge these Indigenous nations for their ongoing guardianship of this land, and we agree to peaceably share in responsibility for stewardship of this land, its waters, and all of its biodiversity. All of those who come to live and work here are responsible for honoring these relationships in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. I'd like to acknowledge and thank George Thompson, who is author patron of Thomas King, and Blurred Words Book Club author patrons of Ben Charland for their very generous support. Thanks also to HarperCollins Canada and to Novel Idea Bookstore for their support of tonight's presentation. Copies of Thomas King's new novel, Indians on Vacation, has just been released, and Novel Idea has copies on hand that are available to purchase in person or by phone. They'll mail you a book. They're easy to find online and on Facebook. You just need to look for Novel Idea Kingston. We'd love to know where you are tonight as you join us for this event. So please just give us a little note showing where you are. And hello and welcome if you're from distant places, as some of us are. Just before I move on to the main event, I did want to draw your attention to our next online event, which is taking place this weekend, actually, at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. That's September 6th, and it features Louise Penny with her newest Gamache novel, just hot off the press, All the Devils Are Here. So do check our website or our Facebook page for details. Registration is by donation for this fundraising event. Now I will move on to just a brief introduction of Ben Charland, and then I'll turn the proceedings over to him. Ben is a writer, podcaster, a creative consultant, and he is an enthusiast endowed with an unrelenting curiosity about pretty much everything. He hosts a podcast quite fittingly called What on Earth is Going On? And that's a show centered on genuine dialogue with people who think deeply and are keen to consider the big questions. Ben's interviewed some of the best minds out there, including some of our festival alumni, Rosemary Sullivan, Terry O'Reilly, Guy Gabriel Kay, Sally Armstrong, among many others. I highly recommend this engaging and wide-ranging podcast, which you can find online at wogoshow.com. That's WOEGOSHOW.com, or by searching What on Earth is Going On podcast. Ben is joining us. When I said far distant places, I meant far distant places. He joins us tonight from Whitehorse, Yukon, where he's as engaged as ever. Please welcome Ben Charland.
Thank you so much, Barbara. It's a real pleasure and honor to be here tonight with Thomas King. I'm excited to chat with him. I'm excited to share our conversation with you. Before we do, and before I introduce Tom, I just wanted to ask all of you who are with us, the 79 participants that we have and growing, I see that number moving up, just did again, to please go to the Q&A and ask your questions in there. So if you go to the bottom of the Zoom, there's a button that says Q&A. You should be able to ask your questions, and towards the end of this event, in about 40 minutes from now, we're going to take those questions and bring them to Thomas King. So you can start now with those questions if you have something burning or something that comes up in the conversation, or you just feel like Ben had a train of thought there and he really didn't follow it through. Well, just take the reins, ask your question there. But without further ado, today's featured author is Thomas King. And while I am certain that a writer of his caliber, distinction, and indeed provocative ability needs no introduction here at Kingston WritersFest, I don't want to be charged with dereliction of duty. So I'm going to give him one anyways. Thomas is the author of over 20 books, and his writing is as diverse in type, genre, and subject matter as it is incisive and evocative in its telling. He's a member of the Order of Canada and the winner of so many prizes and accolades that if I list them all now, we probably won't have time to actually speak. The concept of story and storytelling is deeply woven into his work, as is the profound questioning of those stories and what story is. In 2003, he delivered the Massey Lectures entitled The Truth About Stories. From his PhD in oral storytelling traditions over 30 years ago to the whirlwind of his own storytelling, Thomas is one of our national treasures. But there is one gift that underlies all of this, and it weaves through every book and lecture, and I'm sure, and maybe this is a dare, that it will poke its way through our conversation that we're about to share with you. And that is Thomas's infectious smile and wicked sense of humor. His newest book, Indians on Vacation, came out just last week, and it is one of those rare novels that made me laugh out loud. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Thomas King. Now, Tom, what you're not hearing, and I'm not hearing it either, is everyone clapping like mad in their living rooms or maybe on their toilet seat. Wherever they are definitely clapping and cheering right now. But we can't hear them. Doesn't mean that they're not there. Yeah. I wanted to dive right into this conversation. And I wanted to mention one thing that made me laugh out loud in this book, Indians on Vacation, and that's the chemistry between the two main characters, Bird and Mimi, who in many ways are opposites, but beautifully encapsulate this idea that opposites attract. But one thing that speaks to is one of the book's, at least for me, central questions, which is when you're faced with the reality of the world, whether it's injustice, whether it's seeing refugees in Europe, or whether it's the reality of your own story, there is always the choice to do something or to do nothing. And that choice is made very, very clear in this book, where you have two Indigenous people from Canada on vacation in Europe faced with that choice every day. It's also the choice we face when any of us are on vacation. Do we go to a cafe and sip hot chocolate and do nothing for the day and enjoy the spirit of a place? Or do we go and visit 7 museums and 4 statues and go at the canal at the end of the day? And so I wanted to ask you, when it comes to this choice between doing nothing and doing something, where do you, Tom, yourself stand?
Oh, I have no idea. And I suppose it depends on the circumstances that I find myself in. I have spent part of my life doing nothing and part of my life doing something. And I couldn't predict when I was going to do something or when I was going to do nothing. It's an odd thing that is a decision that is ongoing all the time. I don't think there's hardly a day goes by where I don't sort of ask myself that question in small and large ways. Should I do something about this? Is it that important? Maybe I can let it slide. Sure, I'll do that. Maybe I'll do something tomorrow. It's harder to sort of ignore that when you get into some of the bigger issues, or you get something pushed right into your face. And the worst ones are where you see something that you should do something about and you can't. There's just no way that you can. And certainly Mimi and Bird run into that at least once in this novel.
Absolutely. And it puts that question to the test, because they do still discuss between themselves, well, maybe we can do something. I mean, we did something for these people over here, and that seemed a bit silly. And this idea between action and inaction is clear and present. But I assume, based on the book, that you've traveled to Europe and you've been around as a traveler yourself.
Yeah, I'm not much of a traveler anymore. In my early years, I was a very large traveler. Well, 6'6" and 250 pounds. But aside from that, I was in San Francisco when I was in my early 20s, and I jumped on a tramp steamer off to New Zealand and then to Australia and around the place. I really enjoyed that. But as I've gotten older, that travel lust has slowed down, partly because I've seen enough of the world to know that it isn't that terribly different from what I have right here in Guelph. many of the same issues that are here or around the world. For the novel, it's true that I sort of combined a lot of the travel that we had done, especially a trip we had taken to Prague and then down to Budapest for a time. And I'd always wanted to write a book that took travel into consideration, because one of the questions I always had in my own head was, why do people travel? And I would even ask people that when I was on the road. I would say, you know, why do you travel? They would always look at me kind of funny and say, well, you know, what, blah, blah. And that was about it. That's as far as I got. Nobody really had a good answer for why they travel. The best answer, or I should say the default answer, was because it allowed us to see other cultures. It gave us some insight into other peoples, made us more tolerant, none of which I believe particularly. I don't think that travel makes us any more tolerant than we were if we stayed home. I think that's one of the great lies about travel. And I say that because as I look around the world, we're traveling more. People are traveling more than they ever have. Well, not right now, not with COVID. But before that, we were traveling all over the place. Tourism was a major industry. And in terms of political and social policies, things had really gotten quite worse rather than better. And you would think with all that travel, we'd understand that we are one people on one planet, but we don't seem to realize that yet, or at least we haven't done anything about it.
I think there's an answer to your question too in your book about why do we travel. And it is, we travel to go get a story that we can tell our friends back home. Yeah,
I mean, certainly we'll always come home with stories. And the best stories are the disasters that overtake us on our trips.
Right.
Nobody wants to hear that, you know, you went to Australia and it was a wonderful trip and you had great food, you met wonderful people, and you came home and you were reinvigorated. They want to hear about the disaster at the airport, the mix-up at customs, the night you spent in jail, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and that's actually a big part of the book, I think. I mean, would I want to see a photo album of Bird and Mimi's trip to Prague? No, probably not, and I don't think most people would. But would I like to see a picture of the injuries that one of them suffered? I'm not going to give a spoiler, but one of them suffers injuries at one point in their trip. Yeah, I'd look at that photo. And I wonder, you know, for someone who has spent so much time investigating the meaning and the power of story, what ramification does that have for storytelling when we are going off in search of a story, in a way, hoping something bad will happen so that we are somehow armed with this storytelling juice, so to speak?
Yeah, I'm not sure what it is, but we have this impulse in our being that if we go to, say, let's say a stock car race, we don't want to see who wins, we want to see the crashes that occur on the track. If we go to a football game, we want to see not those wonderful plays with great athleticism. We want to see where people run into each other and they're carted off the field in an ambulance. Now, what is that? I don't know. I don't know. It may be the answer to why we tolerate things like war. It may just be that as a race, we enjoy that kind of thing, or it satisfies some deep desire in us. I'm not sure. I've never been able to figure that out. It seems at odds with what I would expect us to want, which is peace and quiet. But doesn't seem as though we like that as much as we should.
It is something that the character Bird, Blackbird Mavrius, seems to be seeking, peace and quiet. I mean, there are so many jokes about, oh, I just wish I could go back home. And between him and Mimi, who's, you know, almost the typical female in the partnership who's dragging him along to go get a picture taken over here or go experience this. And she's much more than that, obviously, as a character, but there's this interesting dynamic. And I wonder if we were to look at Bird and the fact that he does go and travel and have these experiences, it's kind of going to your earlier point, is he better off for this trip, or is he the same person just having spent some money across the ocean.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you could argue either way. I suspect he's probably a better person for having gone on those trips, just because each trip that you take, there's the chance, the opportunity for something new to happen to you, for you to change your perspective on certain things. I don't think if Bird stayed home, he'd be any happier than he is on the road, but he knows that travel makes Mimi happy. And so he's willing to put up with that for her benefit. And she does enjoy traveling. She has a much more optimistic outlook than Bird does. Bird is, shall we say, slightly on the depressive side. Not bad. And he's got all his buddies with him anyway.
Well, that was another question I had actually, are about Bird's demons, Eugene and Desi. And is that, I guess maybe just a simple question. Where does that come from?
That's my partner's fault. We were sitting around talking, and I was talking about Indians on vacation before I wrote it. And I said, I wanted to do this, wanted to do that. And Helen said, well, if you're going to deal with these two characters, and you've got this character, Blackbird Macrias, then you might want to deal with your demons. And I didn't hear her correctly. I thought she said, I had to deal with Eugene. And I said, Eugene? And she says, yeah, Eugene and the other demons. And I thought, well, that's a great name for a rock group. But, what if I did create these demons that Blackbird has, that everybody has, self-loathing, catastrophizing, depression, despair, and of course, Chip, that big chip on your shoulder. What if these characters were real characters come to life? What if by naming them, by having Mimi name these, that they became characters in the piece itself? And that was a lot of fun, because it gave me a chance to not just talk about those demons, but to show them in action. And they're not exclusive to Bird. Most of us have demons of this sort in our lives, and we generally leave them in the dark where they can do most of their damage. And for Bird, Mimi brings them to light, and they follow him around Prague, all over the place. And they're not kind, and they're a pain in the ass, but they're out there front and center, and you get a chance to see them and see how they work and the kinds of damage that they can do.
Well, and you've made them part of the scenery too. So these demons that represent different facets of Bird's personality are sitting on the Charles Bridge in Prague, yep. And they're walking behind him as he goes toward the clock tower. And it creates a real sense of that his personality is more than one thing, because I think in the first couple of pages, like, oh, he's funny because he's a bit depressed and he doesn't want to be here, and it's funny that him and Mimi are having this. But these demons remind us constantly that he's so much more than that, so much more perhaps than he even thinks that he is. And it was a powerful thing, but it was also, for me, when I came upon that the first time, Bird and his demons, I realized that's a great strategy. That we all have demons, as you say, self-doubt, perfectionism, catastrophizing. And there's a sense that maybe if we name them and position them, we may be able to at least understand them and put them to the side, if never really control them. But yeah.
Yeah, and they provided with all sorts of advice.
Yeah.
You're no good, you don't deserve this. If you do that, bad things are going to happen. They were a lot of fun. I mean, it gave me a chance to work with the character in a different way than I normally would. It was quite a good. I'm sorry it's over. I had a good time with Bird and his demons, Eugene and the other demons. Whenever I say that, I smile. So that was Helen. That was Helen who gave me that idea for that. He gives me a lot of my best ideas, in spite of myself.
Well, it's really nice that you recognize that. In the same way, Bird, I think, would be very quick to recognize that Mimi is the better version of him, at least in his eyes.
Yeah.
There's a theme that runs through this book that obviously runs through so much of your work. It's more than a theme, really. It's a reality. And it is in the very title itself, Indians on Vacation.
Mhm.
If I were to read a book about two people from Norway traveling to Brazil, or two people from California, white people from California going down to Australia, that's one kind of book. But this is that, plus the fact that they're indigenous from Canada, and Bird is from the United States originally, like you. And there was this, it's apparent in the title. And I wonder how important that is for you. That, I mean, obviously that would be your experience as an indigenous man traveling. And so that's the truth of this, the reality of this. But how important is it that this is not just a travel book with a sense of humor, but it is saying something real about the circumstance, the condition of indigenous people who, as you said, often don't travel, often don't have the means, or sometimes the imparted desire to.
Well, the characters that I create in Indians on Vacation, as you say, are middle class Aboriginal characters. You don't see too many of those characters in literature. You certainly see life on the reserve, life in the poorer sections of major cities, Toronto, Winnipeg, Vancouver. But when you say Indians on vacation, we don't think of Indians as going on vacation, first of all. And so the title is, in some ways, a bit shocking. Not shocking in the, oh my God, but sort of like, what?
Yeah.
Indians go on vacation?
Shocking in a way that shouldn't be shocking, really.
No, it shouldn't be shocking, but it is. Shocking is the wrong word. It's a surprise that you've got two Aboriginal characters who have enough money to be able to sort of travel at will, if you will. And I like that. I like to have a range of Native characters in literature, and other people handle, the reserve questions better than I could probably, and certainly that question of poverty is handled better by other writers. So I sort of pick a different ground to work, and this is part of it. Although, I mean, there is that reserve portion, because one of the reasons the only reason they're going on all these trips is because Mimi had a great Uncle Leroy who disappeared along with a family medicine bundle. And she's used the occasion of postcards that he sent back from the early 1900s to drag Bird around the countryside. So each of these 10 postcards is a different city that he was in with the Wild West show. And so Mimi has been working her way through those postcards where Uncle Leroy went, and Prague is the last stop, the last postcard on the list.
Yeah, there's a very powerful sense that these, on every page, that these are Indians on vacation, that you can't escape from that, even though they're middle-class people who travel like anybody else. And as you say, it shouldn't be surprising, and yet it is. But there's also the sense that there's this constant, the weight as well as the excitement of their ancestry with them on every page, that they're searching for the bundle, and they've made a new bundle, and being aware of what other people may think of them as indigenous people in Europe, although that is not as pronounced as you might think it is, perhaps because they're middle-class people. But there's a few times where they actually encounter, so to speak, Indians with a headdress and a peace pipe in Europe. And I wonder if that's something that you yourself encountered when you traveled.
Oh, geez. You would be amazed to find out where Indian iconography has landed in Europe. I was astounded, to be honest with you. I'd go through small villages on a bus trip, let's say, for instance, just sightseeing, and I see the old Indian saloon with, the stereotypic headdress. There's a sort of an Indian pizza parlor in Prague. They just pop up all over the place. Indians as an idea in Europe, a very strong kind of presence. There are big festivals in Germany that are amazing things. Drew Hayden Taylor did a film on one of those festivals as part of a larger film in Germany, where every year they have this pageant, this Indian pageant. Indians attacking wagon trains and riding across the plains. And there are Indian clubs in Europe where you can get dressed up like an Indian and spend a weekend out with the mosquitoes and the cold weather and the damp in a teepee. We were in France on a book tour once, maybe about 10, 12 years ago. We had our kids with us. They were quite young. And we stopped at a gas station at a place called Ile de Lorraine. And my daughter looked out the back window as I'm filling up the gas tank, and she says, "Oh, look, Indians." And I thought, oh, come on. I looked over there, and here are these kids riding horseback with feathers and leathers in this open field, just running around. And Elizabeth says, "Can we go and play with them?" I said, "No, get out of here."
Wow.
So yeah, it was ubiquitous. It was amazing.
Sure. I imagine there's something about that. And the reason I say that too is because this concept of dislocation and relocation for me is another theme of the book. And time, being relocated in time and dislocated in time, which happens when we travel. Like if we go to another country, there's this sense of being in a new location and acclimatizing ourselves to that, but also where the past, present, and future are colliding. We're nostalgic for other places we've traveled before. And we're also thinking of what we're going to do tomorrow. And it's also true that Bird seems to want to get a watch in the whole book, and that association there with time. Yeah, which is actually, there's a character in the back of the Turtle that is also obsessed with watches
Yes.
from a completely different perspective. But anyways,
Yeah.
This idea of time, and I just wanted to know if you had fun with this, because the story is, well, there's different stories being told interwoven with each other, but there's also this line which repeats, "So we're in Prague."
Yeah.
So we're in Prague, which of course is hilarious, the way in which you've interwoven it to the story. But it's also this constant sense of, no, we're here, we're here, we're here. We're not in California or Guelph, we are here. And I wonder if you had fun with that.
I did. That was when I hit upon that. It's a way of resetting the whole scene again. You know, you run off on a story and you go, and then you come back, we're in Prague. It's not Groundhog Day, but it's sort of a way of resetting the clock. To ground ourselves once again. It was, I like those sorts of things that repeat through a piece. If you look at my writing, you'll see that I do that probably more than I should. I did that in The Truth About Stories. I'd always open and close each of those sections with the same pattern. And so in Prague, it is, so we're in Prague. And so we are. And there we're going to stay for a while, unless we go to Budapest, of course, which we do.
Right.
At one point.
But there's some power to that word, so. If it was just we're in Prague, it wouldn't have the same music to it, really. I wanted to ask you a bit, Tom, about your writing process itself. It's something I take the chance to do with every author I get a chance to talk to. And I mean the real structural questions of your writing process, not the airy-fairy, but in other words, do you write with a pen or a pencil or a computer for your first draft?
You know, I've used everything to write with. I started off on a typewriter, on a manual typewriter. And when I was able to afford an IBM Selectric, I thought I'd gone to heaven. And then I worked on that for years and years, and then computers came along, and I really hated the things. They were called word processors at that point. And on those early ones, if you typed, there was a time delay between your finger hitting the key and the word appearing on the screen. Well, I'm a touch typist. I actually took typing classes. My mother thought if I became a really good typist and shorthand person, I could get a job as a secretary to a rich guy. That was one of the jobs that she thought I might be good for. And so I did. I took typing. I was the only guy in the typing class for 2 years straight. And I was second in my class. I was a fast typist. And so I couldn't stand these word processing machines that were always 5 words behind me. And I would look on the screen and I would see what I had, thought about. It was like a brain seizure. But as they got better, then I go on. But I also write longhand. I take books with me, day books to write in. So I'll write on anything, anywhere, anytime. I have no rhyme or reason to this. People ask me, what's my process? And I say, it's not a process. I simply write.
And this book, did you write it longhand or on the computer, this one?
Parts were longhand, parts were on the computer, parts were in a book that I had to transcribe back out again. So for instance, I kept notes on our trip to Prague, and I had kept notes on other trips to Amsterdam and other places that appear in the book. And so I had all that stuff that I had to go back through and see sort of what happened to us. And so it's written on the page, it's typed on the computer screen. I don't do much typing on a typewriter anymore just because I've got arthritis in my hands. I do some of my poetry on a typewriter just because it's slower and,
Something about the feeling and the tactility of it.
Yeah. And I love a good typewriter. I mean, those things were such mechanical wonders. I mean, just lovely pieces. And they did not crash on you. Ribbon might have gone bad. You might have got a key stuck, but your screen didn't suddenly go blue and you couldn't do a thing with it and you lost everything.
Yeah.
So,
is there a time of day that you prefer to write, or do you write anytime?
anytime. It just depends. I have a bit of a schedule where I get up and I take my time, a leisurely breakfast. I have an espresso machine. I like macchiatos in the morning and a little bit of something sweet. And so probably it takes me until 10 o'clock to really get up and going. And I'll write for a while and then I'll practice. I had this idea that I can play horn, which I can't, but I still practice it. And then I have lunch, and then I go back to writing, and maybe I have a nap, and then I go canoeing, come back home and write. But there's no rhyme or reason to it. It just depends on how I'm feeling. If I'm hot on a novel, there are certain points in a novel where the thing is coming to a head, and I have to spend full time on it. And then I'm writing nonstop, or I'm thinking nonstop. I normally sneak up on novels. I'm reluctant to put both feet into the water because I know how long it's going to take me to do it and how hard it is to write. I mean, I haven't written that many books really, and partly it's because it's a hard process. Long form is tough. Poetry is tough. Short stories are tough. And I know it doesn't have that thrill that it had when I was much younger, where I said, can I really write a novel? Do you think it's possible? Oh, this is exciting. Look at that. I've got 4 chapters. Now I say I've got 4 chapters. I need another 44 chapters.
You've said before that your characters don't lead you on. They don't take you anywhere. You're in control. You're the god of your universe when you're writing a book. I don't know if that was 5 years ago. It may not be true anymore, but it hinted at another question that I had, which is, some people frame writing this way. Are you an archaeologist or an architect? Do you dig and reveal the structure and the words of your book, or do you plan it and build it?
Oh, well, I wish I could say I was the architect, but it's probably not true. Even for my mystery novels, I generally don't have a plot when I move into them. I move into most of my pieces through character and dialogue. So I start there. I'll create a set of characters. I'll create a particular kind of dialogue for the piece. And then I'll go looking for a plot, or at least go looking for a story. But until I find the characters that I want to deal with and their voices, there's not much that happens. So it's an awful process in that it's like getting up on the 6-meter board and not bothering to look if there's any water in the pool, but stepping off the edge and hoping to hell that as I find my characters on the way down and their voices on the way down, there's going to be a story to go along with it. And sometimes there isn't. Indians on Vacation was pretty good about that, pretty zipless. I was fortunate with that book. The new novel that I've just finished took me about 8 years. And if you could see the manuscripts that it was before it became what it is now, you'd never know how I got from there to where I am at this point.
Wow. Obviously, I want to talk and focus on Indians on Vacation, but is there anything you can tell us about this new book you just finished?
I can tell you the title. It's called Sufferance.
Okay.
And that's really all I want to tell you about, because it's a hard book to describe, but it's very different from Indians on Vacation. So readers, be forewarned.
All right. There was something you said there about kind of wading in blindly, not knowing where you're going to go. And in a way, you are blinding yourself so that the rest of us can see. In a way, obviously, when we start a book, we're blind to where it goes, but our eyes are opened on every page. And I think you do that very, very well. Last question on this, your writing style, how do you write train of thought? And that is, do you let people in from the beginning, or is there a certain point at which you say, okay, I'll open the door now and you can come take a look? Are you protective or open?
The only person who sees what I'm doing besides myself is my partner. I don't show it to my editor. I don't show it to my next door neighbor. I don't show it to friends. Nobody gets to look at it. And there's a practical reason for that. I find it, and I tell my creative writing students, don't give it to your lover. Don't give it to a good friend who likes your work. Don't give it to anybody. Because number one, you're responsible for every word on every page. Nobody else is. You have to understand that kind of responsibility. And you really have to be able to say to yourself, this is good or this is bad, without anybody else telling you that. Okay, if you can't do that, you can't be a writer, as far as I'm concerned. Because then at some point you have to keep dealing with people and they tell you should do this, you should do that, and you go back and forth. And really, you've become more or less a script writer where the producers come back to you and say, you need to make these changes. So nobody sees my stuff until it's completely done, and I think it's perfect. I don't send anything out until I say to myself, this can be published tomorrow, and I'd be perfectly happy with it. And then people get a kick at the can. Because what happens is, if someone says something to you halfway through the process, it can throw you off kilter. It can throw you off your stride. It can make you begin to question your own ability as a writer. And I think, and writers don't have really strong egos. We're like everybody else. A little bit of criticism goes a long way to destroying us. And I think you really need to keep that to yourself as a writer until you're done, until you're happy with it. And if you're not happy with it, you just keep working on it.
We're going to get to questions from our audience in just a few moments. So I just wanted to remind everybody that if you have a question or you just are thinking about something and it's resonating with you in this conversation, just go to the Q&A at the bottom of the screen, type it in there, and hopefully I'll get a chance to ask Tom your question. But with that, I wanted to ask you, Tom, about this idea of letting your partner in at the beginning of or not at the beginning necessarily, but you have a pretty good working relationship with Helen, I believe, right?
I do.
And
I do.
Has that always been the case? Has that evolved over the years?
Yeah, no, I mean, I met Helen when I was at the University of Lethbridge. I went to Lethbridge in 1980 to teach there in Native Studies. And Helen had come from back east, as they said out in Lethbridge, to teach in the English department. And we had a long, slow kind of developing relationship. And I knew from the very beginning that she was A, smarter than me, had a much better eye for literature than I did. She was better read than I was. And I was pretty well read, but she was better. And I came slowly but surely to trust her opinion. And so if I was going to have anybody read my stuff, it was going to be her. And even there, I don't have her read much of anything until the thing is done, at least the first draft. What I'll do is, if I've got a really great paragraph or great section, I'll let her read that, just to sort of let her know that I'm still an okay writer and she should stay with me and not throw me out on the dust heap. But really, she doesn't get to see the full extent of the piece until it's in first draft. And then she gets in and then she does make comments. But here's the difference. She is one of the few people in the world who I trust to give me feedback. I've got a couple of people, but she is the main one. And when she reads it and she has her comments, then, and one of the reasons I like her is that she doesn't have any concern for my feelings. So she reads it and she is bloody critical and hurts my feelings.
So how does that not throw you off your game? How does that not throw you off your game, like you said a moment ago?
Because we love each other, I guess. I don't know, because we spent so many years together. I know she doesn't mean it in a mean way, even though it hurts my feelings greatly. And I mean, I suppose in some ways, Mimi hurts Bird's feelings just a little bit here and there. So I understand that kind of forgive and forget. So I'm able to forgive her and forget it. And then I go on, I look at her comments, and most of the time they're intelligent. Most of the time they're right on the money. Yeah. And, you develop that over the years to where, you find somebody whose comments you trust, even if they hurt.
Well, and you know that the comments are meant to build you up and not tear you down, which is something you aren't so sure of when it's maybe your next door neighbor who seems pretty persistent in getting your manuscript.
Well, and sometimes, people who have all the best intentions say the god-awfulest things, just completely not to the point. And Helen's never done that. Although every so often she'll say, this is kind of a pedestrian sentence, Tom. And pedestrian is one of those words, it's a four-letter word in my book as a writer. I never want to hear that my work is pedestrian.
Yeah. No kidding. Yeah, it's funny because you're right. There's many times where Mimi insults Bird's feelings in the book, but many times where Bird is a big pain in the ass, and Mimi has to put up with that too.
At one point, I think Mimi says, "I love you, Bird, but you're wearing me out."
Yeah.
That really is, those are the edges of those kinds of relationships. And you always have to back away from those edges if you can. And Bird does for the most part. And so does Mimi, for that matter. They understand the limits of a relationship and how far you can go and how far you can't go.
Well, and it is in those limits, those edges, where not only do we find some of the most interesting material for their relationship, but it's the funniest moments too. And I guess that would be true in life as well. And something you've said before, which is that there's a coping mechanism that Indigenous people have come across, which is having a sense of humor about it. Could be dire and despairing and awful, but if you laugh about it, it's a little bit better.
And there's always some way to reframe the situation that you're in to where, you can have a smile at least, even if it's a rueful smile. To where it hurts and it's terrible, but oh my God, well, okay, we'll have a little chuckle on this because that's all we can do.
So I'm going to go to questions from the audience now, Tom. So I got one from Laura Main here, and she says that this is a question for both of us, actually. What are you reading right now, and has it been difficult for you to read during COVID?
Oh, okay. Well, why don't you go ahead and
okay,
you'll be
I'm
more
actually
interested than me.
Oh, I'm not going to be well. I guess I should. Be careful. Here are the 3 books that I've got to read right now because They're for interviews I'm doing for Kingston WritersFest. So
that's not what she means.
I know, but I'm reading them.
Okay, all right.
I've got to. So this is Planet Canada by John Stackhouse.
Okay.
These are all events coming up in a few weeks. Linwood Barclay, Elevator
Okay.
Pitch,
Yeah.
and Thomas Homer Dixon, Commanding Hope.
Okay.
So yes, I'm reading all of them because I have to. But they're quite enjoyable and really provocative. And I think all three of them in different ways are important to be reading now during COVID-19, during this pandemic, where we're forced to question a lot of things, not only about the pandemic itself, but everything else it puts into perspective. But back at you, Tom.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to be a disappointment because when I'm writing and when I'm hot into writing, I don't read. I don't have the time. As I've gotten older, my writing time has decreased. And so I'm not willing to give that writing time up in order to read. Now, I do read over coffee in the morning, and I have to admit, I read junk. I read spy versus spy. I read action. I read mysteries. I like mysteries. I even reread books that I've read before, and these are not high quality books particularly. So I'm not even going to give you the titles of some of the things that I read, but I enjoy them because they sort of clear the palate, if you will. That sounds like an excuse, and it probably is. But it's hard for me to read serious literature when I'm writing. And as the years have gone by, there's hardly any time that I'm not writing. So if I can sneak in a really good book, that's sort of a treat and a surprise for me. But right now, for the last 6 months, I've been working on about 3 books, and there's just been no time for me to read.
I got a question here from Michelle Yeager, who asks, you create so many interesting characters. Do you have a favorite?
Yes, actually I do. Nicholas Crisp from The Back of the Turtle. And Crisp is a different character for me to create. And he was a kind of metaphorical character that I had a really good time with, and I loved his voice. When I created Crisp and I created the dialogue for Crisp, I sort of fell in love with him. I had to be very careful about how much of Crisp I put into that novel, but he's a great favorite of mine. Really quite liked him. And I like Bird and Mimi in Indians on Vacation as a set of characters. But yeah, those, especially Nicholas Crisp. Whenever I read Nicholas Crisp, I used to do readings from The Back of the Turtle. I'd always read the part that he was in because I love doing the voice. The voice just took me to different places, and he was a fun character.
That's fun. Okay, Natasha Grodzinski says, do you feel that your writing has changed over the years, not just in the elements of style, but in what you want to write about, or what is driving you towards a story? How do you feel when you encounter your earlier works as the person you are now? I guess those are multiple questions, but.
Yeah. When I look back on something like Medicine River, that was my first book, which started off as short stories, and then I discovered if I wove them together, I'd have a novel rather than a collection of short stories. That was fairly simple in narrative style, fairly simple in plot. It ran on character and dialogue, as most all of my books do. I look back on that and I say, that's fine. It's nothing that I want to hang my hat on, but it was a good start. And since then, I've been sort of all over the place, but the themes have been in and around the same issues, and that is natives in a modern world, Native people in a modern world. So that hasn't changed. What has changed really is my approach to style. I've begun to thin it down, to sharpen up the edges of it so that it isn't burdened with extra fat or extra stuff that just doesn't belong. And so I think as I've gotten to be a better and better writer, I've set a firmer edge on my pieces. Indians on Vacation might not look like that, but it is. And certainly the new novel that I just finished has a razor edge to it.
This could be related, and this is from Gabrielle Dupas, who asks, which book do you think everyone should read in their lifetime? Obviously, it's Indians on Vacation, but other than that, which book do you think everyone should read in their lifetime?
Of mine, or just books in general?
I guess it's just books in general. It doesn't specify.
Oh boy, I don't think there is one book that everybody should read in their lifetime. Reading habits are varied. If I said, hey, you should read book A, and somebody read book A and said, that's terrible, that was a horrible book, I didn't like that at all. It depends on what you like. I mean, that's the beauty of writing. If you like science fiction, fantasy, you can go to Stephen King. If you want some really hardcore, nasty edge stuff, you can do what's his name, who did The Road, Cormac McCarthy.
Yeah.
Good indigenous writer, Eden Robinson, just as an example. Just all over the place. So I never try to say, well, you ought to read this book in particular, because readers are different. There are readers out there who read my stuff, I'm sure, and say, oh my God, I'll never read that guy again. That was horrible. That was the dumbest junk I've ever read in my life. Give me a spy who blows up the White House.
On the other hand, I'm sure that there are folks out there who would say that their one book that they would recommend to read in your lifetime would be one of yours. And I think for me, one book that I would put on my list of books you really got to read to understand what's going on in our world is The Inconvenient Indian, a fascinating study and an eye-opener for someone like me who's not Indigenous, to understand not just what it's like to be Indigenous in North America, but another side to a whole world that I don't appreciate, and therefore issues that I don't appreciate. Yeah.
Yeah, that book was a surprise. I mean, I wrote that book in part because I never had a book that I could use in a Native history class. There weren't any books out there that I could just use one and get a conversation going. I always had to use bits and pieces, articles, this, that, and the other. So it started off as that, and I'm still surprised at the acceptance that book. I just had somebody text me this afternoon to say that Indians on Vacation was number 5 on the Toronto Star's bestseller list, and The Inconvenient Indian was number 9 on the nonfiction. And that thing's, what, it's 4 years now, 5 years? I don't know how long it's been since that one came out. I haven't looked at it since it came out. I don't look at my novels once they're published. They're like, I suppose, children. You send them out the door and you say, send me a postcard, let me know how life is, but your room has been let.
Yeah.
No more room for you here at this house. There's a new kid coming through.
Yeah. No, I think it fills that book in particular fills a gap. In fact, I was just talking to a friend of mine earlier today who said he just finished the audiobook version of The Inconvenient Indian. And I just mentioned that I was talking to him. He was like, oh, I just finished his book. And so I think it continues, and maybe this is almost unfortunate, it continues to fill a gap that is not being filled otherwise. And maybe we need more books to fill that gap too.
Well, there are other books. That's the thing. There are other books that have been published since then by some very competent writers. For some reason, that book happened to touch a note in the Canadian psyche. I can't explain it. It's not particularly the best book out there. It's not the worst book out there on the subject. There are other books on the subject. I've got a son who teaches history at Saskatoon, who's just publishing a book about the border, Indians and the border. And I'm sure that'll be a good book. But these things, it's like the American example is Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee. When that book first came out, it didn't do much of anything. And then the ethnic movement sort of picked up steam, Latino, Black, Asian, American Indian. those things came to the fore, and suddenly Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee was rediscovered and became a national bestseller. Were there other books on the same subject out? Absolutely. Why that particular book? I don't know. I don't know. And I would really encourage people to look at other Indigenous writers who have written on the topic of Native history, because there are a number of them out there, and see, get a different perspective, different ideas. I don't like the idea of being the big Indian on campus. I think it's kind of crippling, as a matter of fact. I like to hear a multitude of voices, and so I'm always trying to encourage people to read other writers and get different perspectives, different ideas.
I've got a question here from an anonymous attendee, which is related to what you were just saying. No, don't worry. I'm not just picking them out.
Old anonymous.
What advice would you have for young Native writers who are starting on their own path right now?
Oh boy, I don't have any good advice. Everybody finds their own path. The thing about being a writer is it really is something that you really don't sort of have 4 or 5 choices in front of you and say, well, maybe I'll be a writer. You are a writer. Either you are or you aren't. It's hard to make that a choice. The hard part is that if you want to be a writer, you really desire it, is to have the talent to do it. And writing is not something that can be taught. It really is like having a musical talent for playing an instrument. It's almost impossible to teach. I can tell you what not to do, and I can show you the mistakes that can be made as a writer. Adjectives, adverbs are the easiest things. Get rid of those things immediately. But other than that, you find your own path. You do your own writing. Sometimes you get lucky and sometimes you don't. And a lot of it is luck. A lot of it's timing. I don't have any easy answer. I don't have even a complicated answer for that question. You write, and if you're a writer, you write, and you keep writing, and you keep writing, and you try to find your own way in that. Sometimes you can get help from other writers. Sometimes you can get help from all sorts of odd places in that. But, and one of the problems with writing is there is the business of writing, which is a creative end of that. And then there is the business of actually selling that piece so that you can make a living, or at least make a little bit of money off of that writing. And there are many writers out there who are willing to put the time in as a writer, writing, but they don't know what to do with it once they have it done, and they have no avenues for getting it to an agent or to a publisher or to any place. And that really drives me nuts, because I'd like everybody to have a kick at that can. The writing life is, I'm only happy when I'm writing. I'm not happy once the book comes out and I have to do the publicity of the book. That's terrifying for me, as a matter of fact. I'd rather be in the middle of a problem with a character than talking about what I've just done. But yeah, I don't have good advice. I mean, sometimes I'll sit down with young writers if I run into them at the festivals, and I just talk about the business of writing and the creative process of writing. But I've given up on giving advice.
Yeah. I think that there is some kernel of wisdom contained in your book, Indians on Vacation, about creative. If someone meets that test, that litmus test of you have the talent and the ability to write, maybe they have the self-doubt, though, that keeps them down. And obviously Bird is a creative person in this book who self-doubts and who has named them, who has named these demons. And the relationship that he has with them, and the acknowledgement that they never go away. But somehow in dialogue with them, they be at least mollified, if not controlled. And I think that there is some wisdom.
Well, you can make them stand off in a corner every so often and not be such a bother, but they're always there. they're never going to go away. We all have them, all writers have them. And if I knew what to do with them, besides, talk with them and give them a good scolding from time to time, or ignore them, I would, but I don't.
Yeah. Last question for you, Tom, and then we're going to kick it back to Barbara to close us out. And this is from Lindsay Brandt, who asks, is there a book or a story that you feel must be told, but you don't feel like you're qualified to write it?
Well, that's a good question. I suppose in my life I've thought about, well, I've had people throw story ideas at me that sounded good, sort of true stories that I could then fictionalize. But I've never done any of those stories, because unless I think it up myself, there's the chance that I will be waylaid by the story itself, that I'll discover that I don't have the talent to tell that story in the way that I would like to. So generally speaking, I don't take on a story unless I think I have the skill to tell it. So just as a for instance, a sort of a gross for instance, I've never written from a woman's point of view. There's no way I think I could do that. There are male writers and female writers who take on other personas and do it well. I can't. And so I have a narrow range within which I work. I have to be comfortable with the story. I have to be comfortable with the characters. Sometimes people will say, well, why don't you put more of these kinds of characters into your story? And I say, I'm just not comfortable trying to describe those characters or hearing their voices. I don't hear their voices as clearly as I have to in order to put them into my fiction. So I have limitations, quite a few limitations on what I will create as story, what I will create as character. Now, time and space doesn't bother me. I mean, if you read Green Grass Running Water, you'll know what I mean. I'm not too concerned about that. I'll slip into magic realism with the best of them. But I still have to be able to understand the characters, understand the situation, understand the dialogue. And if I don't, then I can't do it, or I do it poorly and it comes off as poorly.
Tom, thank you so much for taking the time. This has been a wonderful conversation. There are so many questions left in the Q&A that we don't have time to get to, but I would honestly love nothing more than to pitch them for you to get your wisdom on these things, because you've got a lot of it, and it speaks not only in this conversation, but of course in your book. So thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Barbara, over to you.
Well, thank you so much to Tom and Ben. That was just entirely engaging. Where did the hour go? I just want to make a quick reminder that Thomas King's books are available for sale here at Novel Idea. And we just got word this evening that HarperCollins Canada rushed signed book plates to Novel Idea. So thank you, Tom, for signing the book plates. But now that means you get a signed copy of the book, which is pretty swell. I want to thank everyone for joining us and supporting Kingston WritersFest this evening. Do be sure to join our next online event. We have the Louise coming on Sunday, but then 2 weeks from then, September 16th, we're presenting our traditional book lovers lunch. Get a load of that, and there's actually going to be food involved. So check our website, the date and the time and the lunch menu and all of those things, and we'll see you there. So for now, thanks again to Tom and Ben. Stay safe and well. Good night.
Night.